Hi everyone, and welcome to another book review video. So earlier on in the year I was on holiday in San Francisco and I said to myself I really want to go to Barnes & Noble and get one of the Barnes & Noble leather-bound classic books that they do, because I know in some they're sort of starting to stop doing those. So I really wanted to get one because I have quite a lot of them, as if you've watched these videos before you've probably seen some of them and you know that I really love these books. So there we were in San Francisco at Barnes & Noble and I see a copy of Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles. Yes, I know the irony, I bought this in San Francisco. Obviously the first book in that series, Interview with a Vampire, is set in San Francisco. Initially that's where the interview takes place, although it's a story about what happened in New Orleans and his life in New Orleans. It's in San Francisco. But what's even more hilarious is the fact that if you've read the second book that's in that, which is The Vampire Lestat, he talks a lot about the fact that he's in Monterey, well, just not quite in Monterey, but he's outside of Monterey, and that is the place I went to next on my holiday. So yeah, I accidentally had a interview with a vampire / Vampire Lestat themed holiday. Wasn't intended, I was there for a friend's wedding. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up with this book, and I'm really glad because I've recently been watching the series and I've been really enjoying the series, and it was nice to read these books and see the differences from the series and the similarities, and I think that's sort of like quite important. So in this collection there is Interview with a Vampire, The Vampire Lestat and Queen of the Damned. So it only has the first 3 books in this collection, but I thought that was nice. They also link quite nicely together, those 3 books, so it kind of makes sense that it put those 3 in this collection. The first book, Interview with the Vampire, has this really straightforward, easy narrative. Like, he's being interviewed about his life, and every now and again you get these little flashes to what's happening in the interview, but most of the time it's focused on Louis telling the story of his life, and I really enjoyed that. There's definitely this sort of older feel with Interview with a Vampire. It was written in the 70s and it has that those little quirks and things that you get in novels written at that timeline. I think it's very interesting that you can read a novel and you can sort of go, okay, this was written in the 50s, this was written in the 70s, this was written in the 80s, and then look at novels today and go, yeah, this is a really recent novel. I've been having this with like one of the series that I've been reading, which is a really long series, and I can just feel that the way it's written has been changed from when it was originally being written in the 80s to this slight stylistic change that happened in the 90s to how it is now, because the ones I'm reading now were written roughly around about 2007, 2008, so they are so different. And yeah, I think as well, like, you get that older feeling in the style that this is written, because obviously Louis is talking about his life. He's obviously this really old vampire. He's gonna talk in older ways, you know? That's kind of always the joke about vampires, isn't it? That you can tell that they're not quite right because the way they talk doesn't fit with the way we talk now, or the time period that they're in. And you know, I feel like that's the same for books as well. You can tell how old a novel is because it doesn't sound like books sound now. A lot of the sort of very emotional things are very sort of like implied. They're not sort of on surface level like what you get in the series. Like, so if you're going into this thinking that it is full on gay vampires, it is, but it's very implied, under the surface. You kind of got to read into these situations to work certain things out, and I don't mind that, you know. It's like, again, it's the time period it was written. It wasn't going to be really overt. There are some small overt moments which are really nice to have those, but they're not constant. Everything else is, you know, you've got to look a bit deeper to find things. It's also one of those novels that wants you to believe that what is happening is real, and it does that through having a flawed narrator, because obviously when you have a flawed narrator and the narrator isn't always telling the truth and is holding things back or embellishing things, it adds that sense of sort of like suspending disbelief even more, of like, oh, this could be real, because maybe he overimagined this, or they overestimated this, or they didn't quite tell us the truth there. And it's nice to have that. And I do like a flawed narrator. A flawed narrator is always good, so long as you go into it knowing that they're flawed and they're not annoying. You don't want an annoying flawed narrator. A narrator who is just sort of like... A narrator is a bit like Louis, where he doesn't want to touch on certain subjects. You can get that. You can understand those subjects are too emotional for him. He doesn't want to fully go down that route and talk about that. And that's fine. And also as well, it's quite confusing, like, what made him decide to do this interview? It's quite interesting, like, you know, oh, like he just met a young reporter and thought, hey, I'll give an interview about being a vampire. As you do, you know, like, what sort of emotional state was he in that day to decide to do that? Which you do obviously learn more about that as you go through the stories. But it is really interesting to have this character who is flawed, but also you like them, and that's important. So overall, I really enjoyed Interview with the Vampire. It was nice, straightforward. It was a bit heavy going in places because, again, it's all from Louis' perspective, all of his ideas. It doesn't follow... It's not one of those plots that just takes you to the next fast thing that's happening or takes you to the next important thing. It follows his train of thought, and sometimes that diverges from what you want to know, and he's sort of like, I'd rather talk about this than carry on talking about that, and that happens, and sometimes that can make the plot sort of pace change a little bit. But in this style of novel it works, and although you don't read it super quick, it is still fun. The next book in this group of books was The Vampire Lestat. This probably had what I would term the most sort of like fast-paced plot type novel out of all of them, because it's Lestat. He wants to keep you on edge, he wants you to enjoy. He's writing about his life. He likes the sound of his own voice, which goes with his character. He wants to tell you, he wants to keep the reader engaged, he wants you to think his life is so exciting and interesting. And again, he's a flawed narrator because everything is from his perspective in this novel. There's a couple of like time jumps in it where at the beginning he's talking about writing this novel and it's sort of like a forward kind of thing, and then he goes into the story of his life, and then suddenly it catches up to where he is at that point, and then the story sort of takes on a different narrative. It leaves behind the book and carries on at its own pace, telling you the story of what's happened. Still from Lestat's perspective, but you know he's not sitting down and sort of writing within the novel you've just read, even though it's still part of the same thing. If that makes any sense. It's got an interesting sort of like structure, but the middle bit, the vast majority of the book, is just him telling you the story of his life. It's very fast paced and really enjoyable, and I read that one really quickly. Plus also, Lestat is one of those characters which is interested in the why is this happening, please explain this, I want to know the secrets behind this. And I love that. When I read a novel and you get those chapters where finally everything's being explained and it's all being understood, I love those chapters. And this whole book was just Lestat looking for those chapters. So yeah, I enjoyed that about it. And again, the writing style's a little bit older, but you could sort of see and feel that sort of more modern writing style starting to come through in this one, which I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, overall, I would definitely read that one again. I enjoyed it. I'd read Interview with the Vampire again, but... So overall, yeah, I really enjoyed that. It is the biggest one. It is a very big book. There is a lot that happens in it, despite the fact that I've said that Lestat tries to keep it to the really interesting things. Again, flawed narrator as well. I like this. I like this theme of keeping it that it's always the vampires telling their story, and that I quite enjoyed that and thought that was a really nice idea, that, you know, we were getting this whole perspective of how they feel. Again, a lot of things were implied and under the surface. They don't really go into great detail and explicit detail, but it's there. You know it's there. You understand what they mean by the things that they say. And there are more of those moments where they start to talk about those sorts of things again. So yeah, so if you're a fan of the series, again, like I said, this is implied again, so don't like go into this expecting it all to be open and out front. It's not. I wouldn't say the novel isn't explicit, because some of the things that they do go into and they do talk about are quite deep, but it's not explicit in the way the series is, if that makes any sense at all. Now, the last book in this collection of 3 books was Queen of the Damned, and I thought this was a really interesting book. It takes elements from the previous 2 books in terms of writing style, and it sort of meshes them a little bit together. So we have this interesting, all these time jumps where we're finding out about the past and people telling you what's happened before and things like that. And then you have what's going on in the present, but it's all from different narrators. So all of the characters that you have met in the previous books, and some new ones, turn up to tell you their story. And the first half of the book is just people telling you what's happening while the events of the end of the Vampire Lestat are happening, and they're telling you their perspective. And some of those characters you never see again. They just there. They tell you their perspective, and then they're kind of gone. You don't need to hear from them again. And then it gets into this sort of backwards and forwards between Lestat and the other characters and what they're doing, while Lestat is off doing something else, and the Queen of the Damned is involved and everything. And so you get this backwards and forwards. And then you get this huge section where they then start to explain all the history of vampires, everything that's happened. And again, I love that. I do love those. Like, here is the backstory. Yes, I am here for a whole, like, full novel, which is just backstory, with not a lot of plot. But yeah, there is plot, though, by the way, in this. There's actually quite a lot of plot. But what I'm saying is I would be happy for a novel that was just all backstory with hardly any plot. I've read books like that before. So in terms of the pace, it means that the pace is very all over the place. It works, like, it is good, but it does mean that certain characters, it feels really slow when you're listening to them, because they're not fully involved yet. They're just putting the pieces together. And then when you skip to the characters that are fully involved, they know what's at stake. They know that they need to be acting really fast and getting on with things really quickly. And so the pace really quickens up. And it does this backwards and forwards, which not everyone likes. And I don't always like it. Like, I find it quite difficult at the beginning of the book to deal with this backwards and forwards in with pace. But I did get used to it, and then it sort of disappears once everybody's caught up. Once everybody is on the same page, not literally, but once everybody is on the same page within the book and they understand what's at stake and what's going on, it then starts to move really fast. Overall, I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed all 3 books, and I probably at some point will continue reading more of Anne Rice's work, because I know there are so many more books that she wrote after this. And so yeah, let me know, which books do you like that Anne Rice has written, because she has written so many books, and a lot of them are really good books, and they're about vampires and other supernatural things and all that sort of stuff that I like. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, please comment, like and subscribe, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye!